hear anything?
Yes. I'm attempting to silence it.
Okay, if everyone closes off their mics, go ahead and mute your mic.
Okay.
How do you
I'm
do
not
that?
sure how to do that.
On your microphone in the lower left corner, Asia, just click on mute. Okie dokie. And Joyce, your iPad, click on mute. Everybody else is, can you hear me, Joy? There you go. Can you click?
Yeah, where's the mute?
If you find your microphone on your low, usually at the lower part of the screen across the bottom, you have to run your, if you hover over it with your mouse, it'll usually show up.
Hover over what?
Hover over the icons. You see a row of icons?
No, there's nothing down here.
Okay, are you on a Mac? If you look up at the top, you have your stuff somewhere else on there.
Okay, it has, I don't know what it is.
You see a microphone?
No,
Okay. Well, just have to be real,
I'll just be quiet.
there you go. And if a jet comes running through your room, just tell them they got to fly somewhere else. Okay, we're set. And that's all going to be on the video. So see, I'm not worried at all. As I was saying, I've never been really into poetry, although a little bit. And then I started doing some research for this. I was trying to find somebody that would do the presentation. Couldn't really find anybody. And so I thought, okay, I'm stuck with it. So I looked up a whole bunch of stuff and oh my God, I was shocked at what I found. And then I came to realize that I've always liked poetry. It's just that my poetry has had music with it, because I'm really into song lyrics. And so, surprise, something I didn't know about myself, but I'm starting to get into things more now. And I'm going to do a little screen share here because I want you to see how amazingly, how much stuff there was. This is my notes. I think I've got, what, 13 pages. And this was just the beginnings of stuff. But basically, I looked up, it told me what a poet was at Wikipedia, and it told me what a bard was, who used to be the people in the old days, back in the Celtic people and in medieval times. They used to be the people that reported the news. They would talk about the king and all of their wonderful things that they had done. And so those were bards. And then I looked up a little history and I found out that supposedly the oldest known poem ever was the Epic of Gilgamesh. Now there may have been some before that, but they didn't know about it. So that goes back. Now what's weird is one of the places said it goes back to 2100 BC. And another spot down here that I found says it was 7000 BC. So somebody's really confused. So there you have it. There's only a 5,000 year discrepancy back there. Let's see. It says the oldest known poet was a woman. And let's see, Enheduanna, and she was born more than 4,200 years ago and became the high priestess of a temple in what we now call southern Iraq. She wrote poems, edited hymnals, and may have taught other women at the temple how to write. We're back to the first poem. They think Gilgamesh. There was one, what is the oldest known poem in English that they reported goes back to the 7th century, Caedmon's Hymn, and the oldest surviving poem in English. Let's see here. And then we went back. Okay, so then I started looking up who was the father of English poetry, Geoffrey Chaucer, who, by the way, was considered a bard. Let's see. This guy listed a bunch of different people that did like classic poetry, Homer, the Iliad, the Odyssey. Edgar Allan Poe, one of my favorite writers, was actually a Gothic poet. I didn't even think I was reading poetry at the time. Quoth the raven nevermore. Maya Angelou, Walt Whitman, a whole bunch of people. It says poetry is a literary genre that goes as old as some of the most ancient texts archaeologists ever found. And so it's been around forever, and some of us just ignored it a lot. Some of you fell in love with it and wanted to do something with it. Then I did some research into the types of poetry, and I got this nice list. Some people said there was 8, some people 10, some people 12, listing what they thought was the most important types of poetry and the differences. And by the way, if anybody wants this particular document, I can always email it to you, but you can find all of this on the internet if you're really interested. Haikus, most of us have heard of, gnomic verse, ballads. Now the ballad is something that's kind of like the musical people that I listen to, but there's also like the Rime of the Ancient Mariner and Annabel Lee. Epic poetry is those big, long, honky things, Iliad, Odyssey, excuse me. Then there's limericks, those funny little things. I think I used to write some limericks. That's what I did. And it goes on down. Then I got into the Writer's Digest, and this guy is keeping a running list of every time he discovers a new kind of poetry, he's adding it to the all to the group. Every time he adds it to this list, and he has so far come up with 168 poetic forms. Now, the forms aren't necessarily this type of poetry, but they are the form that is used. So, you know, here we go, and you can see this list. If anybody's interested, they'll stop and I'll read one to you, this thing, but these are the, I couldn't believe it. The rest of you, I don't know if you all knew that all this existed, but my goodness. Oh, now we're into prose, we can stop there. So the topic is actually very, very deep, very complicated. There's lots to it. And as I said, this is all available for you if you have any interest. I will try to add some things occasionally in the newsletter. So at that point, I'm going to kill this, but I'm going to have a different share real quick, which is this book, which is coming out in, I think, April 19th, The Heart of American Poetry. It's a thick book, and this guy, Hirsch, is very well known. I'm going to reach over and pull this art copy that I got. You can see it's thick. But his basic idea that he wants to get across is that poetry is one of the ways that our history has been written down, the history of the country. And it goes way back. And so I really appreciate it because, and I'm just getting into the book now, but I thought I'd let you know about that. If you're a poetry buff and would like to add that to your library, that will be coming up. Okay. I don't think anybody's going to have a question for me yet, but if you do, you can unmute yourself and ask before we move on to Beth. No? Okay, Beth, I'm going to turn it over to you because I know you came better prepared than I, and you have something more that's important to say.
Well, I'm not sure about that, Linda, but I am going to take it from a slightly different angle. Poetry for me has always been a very personal expression. I really have a sense of kinship for the person who said earlier that she was kind of nervous about reading her poetry because, you know, in a certain way, stories and novels, that's external, but poetry is so deeply personal, can be, but it's our way to uniquely connect to our world as we perceive it, as we research it, as we feel it, experience it. And so for me, poetry, A, saved my life, B, I've always done it, and C, I'm the tall kid in the back row, the nerdy one wearing glasses. So what I want to say to you first, all of you, is that the first question to ask is, what does poetry mean to me? Why am I writing it? What is it that propels me to grab the pen? And it can be internal and it can be external. But the second question is, who am I writing it for? Am I writing it for me? Is it something just for me, or is it something I want to share? Because when you're writing for yourself, that's when it's tough to stand up and read it. But if you write poetry enough, then it becomes part of your own language, the way you connect who you are to the world, and then you begin sharing it. And there are many, many ways to share it, like today, a very small group of friends who all love poetry and are interested in hearing what each other has ready to share. And also, then we can share by publishing, by participating in readings, and by continuing to write, of course, and by blogging and by making videos. I even know people who make these little YouTube videos to share as they read their poems and connect them up with images. So it's kind of neat. So I just want to show you one such shared. You may already be familiar with this book. It was published by Spokane Authors and Self-Publishers, SESP or SASP. And it's called Celebrating Spokane Authors. And it's a collection of short stories and, wait for it, poems. So that was fun. And it gave people who maybe had only shared their poetry with a few friends an opportunity to put it out there. I had the privilege of traveling with my husband to South America. And so because it was such an amazing journey, I created this horribly expensive color paperback. But throughout, as I was writing about the journey and we were traveling, I kept a travel memoir, and then as I translated it, what you will see is pictures and poems all through this book, because poetry is my way of capturing the flavor. And the highlight of the trip, you're never going to believe this one. Pablo Neruda lived in a small town in Oro Preto, or near in the province. I'm probably going to mess that up. But anyway, somehow we came to this small town and we stayed in a bed and breakfast. And it was originally where Pablo Neruda had lived. And we slept in his bedroom. Now, I don't know about you, but that was, I mean, I felt like I was breathing rare air just to even see and say he walked through this kitchen, this fabulous, wonderful poet. But anyway, so then all I would say to you is to share your poems, whether you share it with friends or family or a wider circle, is probably the very best that you can do. It's really important to keep writing and to trust your inner voice. And with that, I'll turn it back to Linda so we can hear some of these wonderful poems you brought, unless somebody has a question.
Any questions yet from anybody? Thank you, Beth. That was wonderful. Wow, I am jealous. I love thinking that I've been close to touching people that mean a lot, and Neruda is one of them. I actually ran into a couple of his poems and kind of went, oh my, okay. More of this, please. So thank you very much. I appreciate your sharing. Okay, let me see. I could go in order of people's volunteering. So I think what I would end up doing is, Asia, did you decide you wanted to read or just listen tonight?
Well, a little bit of both.
Okay.
I have of the 8,000 some odd poems that I had published, one of them is very meaningful to me.
Okay.
It's in Cats magazine in 1974. Oh, what wondrous worlds conceived in the touch of a kitten's paw or the joy in a child's eyes. Of all of them I wrote, that's my favorite.
Wow, that's nice.
Thank you.
What made you choose a kitten as
Well, I just got married. I'd had a beautiful career in poetry until I found my dad murdered. So I was attempting, after I got married, I was attempting to recreate my poetry. And I happened to see a commercial, a printed commercial for a baby lotion. And I looked at that mother holding that baby, and that poem came to me. Well, I mailed out 6 of them, spending the money before I ever got anything. It was the only one published, and I got paid 80 cents for it. And it's still my absolute favorite poem.
Wonderful. That's great. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
And let's see, next person Katie, I had you next. You were right up front there. Do you have anything you wanted to actually go ahead and read? Where'd you go?
Sorry, I was muted.
You were muted.
I have a couple. This is a really new thing for me. I mean, I used to like dream poems, but I wouldn't wake up much enough to write them down, which is odd, I know. But anyway, so I think the pandemic sort of got me going a little bit.
Mhm.
I'm just looking, I have them on my phone of all things, so I'll read this one, which they're all pretty personal, but okay. Missing one person. Gentle words spoken across the distance, always there for comfort. Years change us into friends that laugh and support each other. But now, watching her disappear bit by bit shakes my world.
Yeah, someone close to you?
That was my aunt, who was like my mother. Yeah.
Well, it comes across in those few words.
I don't know. I don't know how to write like, a style like you're talking about. The only thing I've written with any like specific style is because I wrote a couple of haikus.
No, I don't think it has to have style. That was lovely. I could feel that.
Thank you. I have funny ones too. I always made up songs or poems about my pets, which is sort of strange. I guess a lot of people do. Okay, I have this other one, which is a little different, and that's all I'm going to read. Sometimes I wonder why I'm alone. The doubts in my mind are torturous and leave me wondering why, not to be rude, a large grouchy woman at Safeway hauls around a slim, decent-looking fella who seems pleased to be chosen by his paramour, despite the invisible chain wrapped around his wrist. I don't know where that came from. I think maybe I dreamed that last night. I don't know.
You do a lot of observing of people. Sounds like.
Yeah, I've worked in the healthcare industry for 35, well, longer than 35, but yeah, and rehab and stuff. So yeah, a lot of observing, like it or not.
All right. Well, thank you. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Very much for sharing. Let's see who I've got now. Next up, Sue Eller, I don't think made it, but unless you're here, and I can't see you, Sue. Joan, are you ready to read? You had a couple I think you were thinking of doing.
Yeah, actually, I was going to tell people about, I signed up for a workshop, Writer's Digest workshop. It's called Fundamentals of Poetry Workshop. You can find it under Writers Online Workshops. And in that workshop, they ask you to read this book. It's called The Art and Craft of Poetry by Michael Bujeja or something like that. And it was really helpful. I consider myself an amateur poet. I love poetry. I always have. I won a state contest, poetry contest when I was in the 6th grade. So I've always been writing poetry. But anyway, in this book, one thing that caught my eye, this guy says, as a reader of poetry, I knew that the best work of great writers was not based on mere description or observation, but on epiphany or peak experience. And so epiphanies or peak experience usually accompanies highs, lows, and turning points in our lives. But the poem that I'm going to read, I tend to write a lot of poetry for my family, you know, things, but this one, my writing group really liked, and it was written about my brother, Don. He's the baker in the family, and the poem is called The Cinnamon Roll. Don mixes a batch of white dough utilizing the KitchenAid mixer and Grandma Kopp's recipe, like Mom taught him, carrying on a 3-generation tradition. He enjoys working with his hands, feeling the dough's texture and stickiness before kneading 5 or more minutes, letting it rise, afterwards flattening the squishy blob, lathering melted butter, adding sprinkles of cinnamon sugar on top, before he gently rolls the dough and slices uniform pieces. A heady aroma wafts in the kitchen as the oven door creaks open when he removes the bread and drizzles white icing over mouth-watering sweet rolls swirled with cinnamon, and rewards himself by taking the first sweet bite. Some say a cinnamon roll is slang for a person perceived to be gentle, good, and kind. But Don's willingness to share his bread with others makes him the biggest cinnamon roll of all.
That's great. Oh, that was neat. I could actually smell the cinnamon rolls coming out of the oven. That's pretty cool. I haven't been around a cinnamon roll for years, so that's saying something.
Yeah.
Funny how our minds can bring back a picture like that, and everything else comes back with it. That's cool. Thank you. Okay, let's see. This is so neat. We're having fun. It's like a little party. Paul, you had a poem you wanted to read, right? You still up for it?
Sure.
Okay, doke.
I have to set the mood here. I'm a former NASA engineer, degree in physics, programmer, electrical engineer, that sort of thing. And I have overdosed on poetry for my whole life. And it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I'm not a poetry lover. This is something from my memoir I am writing. Why, yes, I am a rocket scientist. Poetry, a game whose figure of merit is simply subjective impact on feelings. In poetry, form, not function, is all that matters. Science and engineering, though, puts function first, pursuing both. Poets are wedded to form, often a formless form, bastardizing science with good-sounding, bad aphorisms. Scientists can't get away with such silliness. No matter how beautiful the bridge, it must stand on its own. If it crashes, it's worthless. Not so for artists and poets. Poetic license covers a multitude of chagrin. When one actually has to know something to do or to critique a work of science. A scientist can understand a poem, but the poet may be incapable of divining a natural law. Poor sod. Fine arts grads with time on their hands put the emphasis on the wrong syllable to fit iambic pentameter, using thou for you and nor for not, stanzas marching as soldiers in lockstep, too much bother to pull facts from a strained allegory. Putting feelings first, blithely ignoring facts, muddies the water, hiding what's useful. Poetically stretched allegories confute, convoluted words confuse, emotions evoke, feelings dominate, seduce. F equals ma, a equals mc squared. The infinity of a series and self-replicating recursion are at least as profound as any literary poetry I've ever read. A poet once said he pitied those who knew only things. I pity those who live only inside their heads, not understanding things, not understanding what makes the universe what it is, not understanding the majesty of a researcher turning the world of science on its ear with a new scientific discovery, a new thing, a fundamental feat, the meat of others to follow the discovery, to uncover ever more marvelous secrets. I pity those who don't care to understand such wonderful things. Only scientists and engineers comprehend how little we know, how much is yet to be learned. Only they know how to expand our knowledge into the as yet unlearned, the unlearned that is ever calling us to learn more. Creativity, find it best in science. Now I'll have to duck some slings and arrows.
Thanks, Paul. No, that was, yeah, actually, that was poetry. And one of the things that I've learned was that it comes in all sorts of forms. And one of the things they talk about is free verse, which is kind of like this is. It doesn't have to rhyme. It doesn't have to have any particular number of doesn't have any line counts or anything like that. It's just free verse. But I guess if I was to suggest anything that I've learned that has been important to me in this research is how much is communicated by poets. I think it's hard for some of us to understand what they're actually saying and what they're getting across about their view of life, because they can go into real depth about issues and things that are happening, particularly in society. So I understand, because I've always been a scientific type, and I always have understood that I look after facts and information, but I am really starting to learn to appreciate what poets have been offering us all these years that I was overlooking because I didn't realize in my short-sightedness, I was unable to realize just how deep they were going into topics about life. But it's just another language, another way of talking. So
I find it very disconcerting in several ways.
yeah. Well,
If it's so personal, sometimes I get a little bit uneasy knowing so much about somebody that I don't know very well. And some people consider their poetry so fundamental and so profound, and I fail to find the profundity in it. So it's a little unsettling for me.
Sorry, I had to stop Asia. She accidentally was sharing her screen with us, so we were just getting a big picture of her rather than
Yeah, I saw her.
No, that's okay. I mean, it's one of the things is this is all very subjective. Everybody has their ideas. If you have a hard time understanding something, trust me, I'm the kind of person that's always been, if it wasn't something already in my bailiwick, I could be very critical and very judgmental. And in my old age, I'm starting to learn that maybe there's a lot of this stuff that I just didn't understand. And so I'm trying to open up and appreciate things a little more. So let's see. I have Sandy, you were next up, I think, in volunteering.
Oh, lucky me.
Lucky you.
I have to apologize to Beth because she already knows the first poem I'm going to share. And most of them are fairly short. I can't put myself in a box because I have lots of different interests. And I had a music teacher once tell me that I'd never be good at anything because I like to do too many things. And I can remember thinking at that time, I'm going to prove her wrong.
Good for you.
So this poem is called Forest Encounter. And I have written much more, but this is the first part that I wrote. And I hope to get it illustrated for a children's picture book eventually. I met her in the forest. She was shy as she could be. She peeked at me from behind the ferns below an ancient mossy tree. How is it you can see me? She asked me in surprise. Most humans cannot do this. We're invisible to their eyes. I leaned in close and whispered, I believe in wood folk, and I'm quiet as can be. I've seen the wood folk in my heart since I was only 3. She looked at me with wonder and blessed me with a smile. I see you have a child's heart. Come with me a while. She's a fairy.
Nice, nice.
So that's the start. And then the next one, I just see things and start musing on them. So this one's titled Crescent Moon. A crescent moon hangs in the dim turquoise sky. Night has come and geese fly in shadowy lines, calling to one another as they float across the bright lunar glow. They hurry to water, seeking a safe place on a lake or pond far from predators. Sleep well, feathered friends.
Oh, nice. You like
And this,
nature or not?
pardon?
You like nature?
I do. I really, really do a whole lot. Always have been intrigued with nature and the forest and the snow, everything. This one is about my granddaughter. She hated me when she was a baby, wouldn't have anything to do with me. So this is something I wrote when I went to visit them, and I'll just read it. It's titled Coraline. I walked into your house and your big sister greeted me with delight. We dropped to the floor and began to play. Your daddy held you in his arms. You looked at me in surprise and then anger. You declared your tiny fury in your baby way. You had no words, but your emotions were clear. Who was this usurper who dared to play with your big sister? If looks could vanish, I would be history. I kept glancing at you, but not too much. You glared at me, giving me the meanest look you could muster. I didn't know babies were capable of that. You were no ordinary baby. Then you turned in your daddy's arms, looked up at him questioningly, and gave him a puzzled face and grunted, ah, ah, ah. Then you turned and glared at me again. You did this repeatedly, protecting your sister. I smiled at you in a friendly way. You would have none of it. There would be no making friends with my little granddaughter today. Your daddy tried to soothe my angst. She doesn't like anyone but her mother. She just tolerates me, as if that could soothe my hopeful heart. I knew my work was cut out. I knew in time we would bridge our gap. You were worth the wait. I told her this
How long
story when she
did you
was
write
4
that?
years. Pardon?
How long ago did you write that?
She was a baby and she is 8 years old now.
Have you read
I
this?
told her about it when she was 4, and she just laughed and laughed and laughed. And she said, tell it to me again, Grandma. Tell it to me again. And then she started telling it to me.
Oh, that's neat.
So, yeah, she didn't really like anybody but her mother. He was right. So yeah, I just write about life.
She's gonna have a keepsake.
Yes. So thanks for letting me share.
Well, thank you for sharing. I appreciate it. Franklin. I should call you Frank, right? Because I'm sure your name isn't Franklin.
No, it isn't actually.
I couldn't help it.
It's an Italian name.
Oh,
Francesco.
Chesco? Frank,
Francesco.
mhm.
I just wanted to say that I think this is a cool topic. I love poetry. You mentioned Neruda. I was blown away by a couple of his love poems when I was discovered him younger. And I think my three favorite poems that I would share with you to consider if you haven't read them. One is called Invictus by W.E. Henley, and you may think you don't know it if it doesn't ring a bell, but I guarantee you've probably heard it and just not realized that's what it is.
How's that spelled? Is it Victus or Evictus?
Invictus.
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 Oh.
And then there's there's a poem called Silence by Edgar Lee Masters that I think is just a tremendous poem, especially the final stanza. And then nobody is going to be shocked by this, and everybody has heard of this one, but I love the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock by T.S. Eliot. It's one of those poems that I struggled to understand when I was in high school and first was introduced to it. And every time I go back and read it, every few years, it hits me different, and I interpret it differently. So I have written poetry. I don't think it's very good. I mean, one of them won an award when I was down in Monterey in the military. But I'm always nervous about sharing that kind of thing because I just don't know that it's very good. But I did something a little different that I asked Linda to let me share. And that is, rather than put my own poetry out there and present it as my own poetry, I have a fictional character in my River City series. Her name's Rebecca Battaglia. She's the wife of a police officer, Anthony Battaglia. And about the third book in the series or so, she's got a couple kids at home and she's not working right then. And so she starts kind of exploring her artistic side, and she starts writing poetry. And what I ended up doing was including her poetry in some of my work. And so is everybody seeing these 6 books here right now?
Yep.
So she had a part of a poem included in Beneath a Weeping Sky that actually gave the name to the book. She had a piece of a poem in here as well in the 4th book and the 5th book. And then in this last River City book, Dirty Little Town, and I wanted to share that snippet with you. I also snuck her into my Stefan Kopriva series, which is a spinoff from River City in the 2nd of that series. And then I got really sneaky. I write some installments for a series. I created an edit of a novella anthology series that Down and Out Books publishes called A Grifter Song. And I guess it's the 13th installment is called Down Comes the Night. And I put a Rebecca Battaglia snippet at the beginning of that as well. So if nothing else, I made sure that the Grifter Song universe is firmly in my River City universe. But anyway, this last one was in Dirty Little Town. This is the piece of the poem that I shared that Rebecca wrote. So if it sucks, it's her fault. If it's wonderful, then you can buy her book whenever she puts it out. But here it is. A tempest, a teacup, a sacred mound, unasked, unbidden, without renown. Unspoken, unseen, mysteries abound, yet all mouths still worship the crown. And all our sins wallow and flounder without a sound down in this dirty little town.
Oh,
And that, of course, is the title of the book.
I love it.
So that's kind of the stuff she writes. It's a little oblique, but it's kind of fun for me to every once in a while. I don't know about the rest of you, but I found that much like song lyrics, I can come up with short little pieces. I could never write a whole song, but I could come up with a verse or a couplet or whatever. And so that's what I do with Rebecca. So it's just a different convention, and I thought I'd share it.
No, that's great. I love that. One of the things that I'm coming to appreciate about poetry, and I suppose I'm not the only one, is that anybody can read a poem. Now, I know it technically when you're in school and all that, they expect you to come up with the correct meanings of the symbols and everything that's being used. But when I'm reading poetry now, I find that people could take it so many different ways, because I think one of the things about poetry is it reaches out from my heart. If I'm writing it, I'm sharing something with others, and then they can see how it affects them or what it makes them think of. Because part of communication is somehow turning each other on to new ideas, so that we aren't stuck in our old modes and, you know, only think one way, but we can stretch and come up with other. Anyway, that's my 2 cents. Anybody else want to throw anything in? I know we still got Steve here to talk, so. Well, Stephen, how about we go with you? I think you're the last one on my list. Somehow, see what happened. You ended up last because I missed you somewhere.
No problem. I'm glad to have this opportunity, and I love this group. It's a joy to meet with folks that share common interest in words. I have been writing poetry for almost 60 years, and actually, I was an English major in college and got a degree in that and teaching, and I taught poetry for a time. But I would like to share with you just a couple things. One thing is that I've written both rhythmic rhyming poetry and free verse, and even hybrids, which are a combination of both. But I tend to appreciate free verse more readily. The first one I want to read to you is just, it's a nonsense. It's a jingly kind of thing. And it's not supposed to have any deep meaning. So the piece is called Toe Tapping Tune. A toe tapping tune jingles lightly through the air. It flutters softly in my ear and dances behind my eyes. And to my surprise, I'm happy for no other reason except for the pleasing of a toe tapping tune. Where are we here? Hold on here. Oh, that's not too far. Pulling these up real quick here.
You're fine, no problem.
This is entitled We Do. And I read this one, and I have one other, my most recent poem that I'd like to share. Our whirlwind-driven lives leave us dizzy drained. Reeling, we collapse side by side for almost rest, with an occasional drifting caress, more gesture than intent. We spring to the alarm like Pavlov's dogs and trot off, salivating through another day. The common cause consumes us with a smirk and distance hazy promises. Constantly clattering automatic days grind more quickly than before, abandoning us bewildered with threadbare nerves. Then we hold each other for survival. Hidden from social storms and torrential time, our essence is a fragile flickering, anxious to leap to a crackling flame, were it not for the love profound beyond understanding, we would be diluted by indifference or dissolved in the cauldron of a boiling society. And this is my most recent poem, and it's a bit political in nature. I asked Linda if she thought this would be appropriate.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Yeah.
Didn't discourage me, so I guess I'll do this. It's called What Happened. I poke the remote. The babble screen springs to life. Colorful images and talking heads spew garbage and sale seductions, defining how awful and awesome this day can be. The stupid meter pegs the pin. I remember the good old days when Walter was the trusted bringer of real news, containing the real facts, sans alternate fantasies. Cue nonsense has poisoned feeble minds made mad with the stuff that used to be limited to tabloids and toilets. Civil wars again, threatening our existence, the realm of idiots. American Christian Taliban, believe what we believe or die. Corporate legislators abandoned those hopeful citizens who put them there for the treasures offered in exchange for their souls. Oaths mean nothing to them. There is no honor anymore. Greed and sex and power have buried it in the sad ground of a dying earth. Decency is decaying there. I poke the remote. It is time for tears and guillotines.
By the way, I love that, Steve. Love it.
So that's it. That's what I have.
I feel like that poem could have fit both left and right people.
There's probably some truth in that.
Hopefully, most of us, I think, are kind of down the middle. I could be wrong, but
That's where I try to be.
yeah, me too. Well, we can open up your mics if you want. We can all talk on top of each other now. I don't know if folks have anything they want to bring up or something they thought of. Beth?
Well, I was hoping to read a poem.
Oh, I'm sorry. I thought, okay,
I have two I'd like to share.
sure.
Very different from what anybody else has done. What can I do? First one's called Soccer. There's nae sport in it if you cannot play the game. Twist your head down, scrub the dirt off your leg and curse and hope, and flail after the ball down the grassy field and bark and back and hate the other side till the whistle calls done. There's just that moment, and you don't know it then when the ball sails past and your boot taps it so it flies good and true. They look at you different then. All the rest is remembering.
Wow. That's neat. Sandy's down here quietly clapping.
Well, it came to soccer late in life, but it was fun. And I also spent some time in Scotland, and I love history. So the second poem is called Roughing It. When fur traders crossed the mountains, they traveled light. Pemmican, guns, tin plate, and tin cup in pouches. Their ponies belly deep in snow. They wore snowshoes when the horses gave out, ate their moccasins when the game hid, made friends and found wives where they could, traded twists of tobacco for furs, drank rock gut at isolated posts, sang ribald songs to forget the bone cold of winter and the howls of wolves. Sometimes I wonder what they thought about as they scanned the skies for sudden storms or the ground for tracks. They must have missed those they left behind. Did they marvel at sweeping vistas, unending pine forests, or stare up at the stars? They must have worried about the miles ahead, signs of an early winter, an unhealed cut, frozen fingers and frozen toes. They might have wintered over at a trading post, hunkered by the fire, trading stories, gambling, passing a bottle. But when the snow melted, this I know. They would lurch outside, sniff the air in all directions, eager to go.
Wow. That's lovely. Very nice.
Thank you. And I did forget one more thing. You mentioned Robert Lee Brewer, who is really a wonderful resource on Writer's Digest. And since you all love poetry, I would invite you to know or remember or plan for April is National Poetry Month. And the challenge that Robert Lee Brewer, among others, lays down is to write a poem a day, every day for the month of April. So there it is. The challenge is down.
Can we just do ones that have 2 lines?
Haiku, I hear you.
I tried
And-
to, I took a class once for a while from Lisa Conger, who's a local instructor for all kinds of poetry. Boy, does she know her stuff. And we got to do haiku, and I had so much fun. Those things are great. Trying to fit, because they're very mathematical, and so you have to make this work with math.
A discipline, yeah.
Quite different.
Candy's dandy, liquor's quicker.
Mhm.
Ogden Nash.
Linda,
He's a poet and don't know it. Oh, Stephen.
yeah, I was just going to say that, Frank, your interest in, or your situation with putting the poetry into your books triggered what I'm doing now. I'm writing the third in a series of historical novels taking place around 600 BC in ancient Greece. And I have incorporated in that only one actual historical figure, and that's Sappho, the poet and poetess and philosopher from that time. And in this third book, she entertains the sailors on a ship with her poetry. And I've actually taken a translation of her poetry to include in that. Fortunately, it was in the public domain, so I've included that in the book. But I think poetry in a book adds to it. I think poetry enriches our word capacity in our prose.
Mhm, mhm.
I think so. I was going to say, I went to grade school in the 1940s, so you can know how old I am. And in the 5th and 6th grade, the teachers had us learning yards and yards of poetry. In the 5th grade, you could pretty much choose whatever you wanted to learn. And I've realized in later years, there's one poem that almost all the girls learned and recited in class called Patterns. And I don't know who the poet was, but if you look it up, you realize it's an anti-war poem. And it's the voice of a woman talking about the formal patterns of her life and sort of upper class thing. And then her lover who walked these patterns with her goes off to war and doesn't come back. And it ends with this sort of anguished cry, God, what are patterns for?
Yeah.
But all the girls just recited this in their little sing-song voices, God, what are patterns for? This is the whole point of the poem. But anyway, this was during World War II. I think the war ended when I was in 5th grade. In the 6th grade, she told us what we had to memorize. A lot of them were these Edgar A. Guest poems, which were all sort of supposed to make you good, clean, upstanding citizens. So they were all moral, what do you call them? Sort of, they were all rhymed, but they all had a sort of lesson to stand up straight and tell the truth and all that sort of thing. So, but I did have a poem I thought I'd read if there's a chance. It's in this little book of short stories, which is for sale at Auntie's. And it's just, I just stuck it in because I'm not really a poet, but this is a poem based on something that actually happened one morning. One morning out walking, a big black dog I did not know came bounding to me. His eyes, his tail, and the stick in his mouth said, "Play with me, play fetch." I grasped the stick. He tugged. I pulled. "Let go or I can't throw." He let go and waited, watching me. I threw, he ran. And in that instant, in my 70th year, he made me a child again.
Wow. Oh, that's wonderful, Fred. I like that.
Yeah, it really happened. I stood there in the street looking at the dog run and thought, he just made me a kid.
Yeah. Cool.
Dogs are amazing.
Well, so much about life is amazing if we'll give it the chance to be. So I don't know how many people go through life ignoring everything around them, and it's like, how can you do that? I walk down the street and I'm the person that sees every squirrel move and every bird you know, every leaf that falls, I look to see who knocked it down. It's usually there's some critter up in that tree that was munching away or something. I don't understand how people can live life and ignore all of that. It's just weird to me. But we've got some people here that didn't say anything, at least two. Dan's phone is here. and Tonda, you're here, and Tracy. And I wonder, and Nancy, you're here too. Did you have?
I'm here.
I'm curious if anybody has read about Poe's life and that he was actually wrote a lot about science in his own way, and scientists even today use some of his work for their work.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I had read that in a biography. It's been a couple of years ago I saw that. Yep.
Went to West Point.
Yep. Anything to share, Tracy?
Hi all. I'm relatively new at writing. I've developed a passion for it, so I'm just kind of checking things out, and I'm grateful for everything that I'm going to learn and what I've heard tonight. And I'm a little unsure of how the format typically goes, so maybe offline, Linda, you could tell me how it typically goes. But I certainly value everything you guys do, and I'm here to stay, hopefully.
Wonderful. Wonderful. Yeah, anybody that wants to chit chat like that, just stick around. I won't close the meeting off when you all leave. I will stop the recording, and then, we can, anybody wants to ask questions or whatever, I'll stick around for a little bit.
I do have a poem I can share with y'all.
You have a poem? Okie doke. Got a couple minutes.
Here it is. It's called Moms Without Birthdays. And here it goes. She spends her physical presence in a box, originally purchased for Dad. She's in our hearts and minds spiritually, of course. This is her second birthday without her laughter and merriment. I just wonder what her thoughts were when she saw Jesus so unexpectedly that hot summer afternoon. It's quite obvious she didn't plan to drive head on to the car. It's quite obvious she didn't plan to cause disruption in our lives. Yet here we are looking at all the growth we experienced this past year, and we wonder, or is it wonder, has it been worth it?
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah. That was by my mom, by the way.
I got a poem, Linda.
Okay, doke. We gotta go ahead. We gotta hurry along because we're almost out. We're actually out of time, but we're okay.
It's a funny one.
Okay.
Did Jesus ever own a French poodle? The Lord loves all the animals he's created to a degree, whether mixed up mutts or purebreds with fine pedigrees. Yet why is the Bible so strangely silent about Jesus owning a pet? Wasn't it possible that one of the apostles cuddled a ferret? An animal, a camel, donkey, or a lamb just ain't the same as a dog. Such had hooves and tails, but possessed the personality of a log. Being so smart, it's obvious that Jesus owned a dog, faithful and true. When he needed to be alone, his pet surely helped him through. And though he smiles on all the shaggy, wagging, barking breeds, because of his public reputation, there was one he could not concede. A French poodle would have caused many to fall away. Remember, the Lord of Lords already had many that did nay say. The Messiah came to earth with a heavenly cause. There was no room for a dolled up
dog with painted, manicured claws. A poodle's constant need for special brushing, cleaning, and care would have drained away precious ministry time grooming that poofy hair. If one cannot imagine him taking such an animal for a walk, just think of the embarrassing pointing, jesting, and talk. Even for a man's man, it would have been hard to bear, making some to stumble and others to swear. When he walked upon the water, there was no poodly pooch trotting beside. Of course, if there had been, then why does scripture so hide? The four-footed French canine is so prissy, showing, and vain. If the Son of Man had owned one, how could he ever show his face on earth again?
Good for you, Mark. That is different.
Actually, he had a donkey.
Donkey.
Hey, that's your own poem.
Yeah, I
I
don't
wrote
think,
that about 11 years ago.
wow. I don't think he thought anything, he should own anything. I think he was a little bit different that way.
Yeah.
But, well, folks, I think what I'll do is just say that we can be done for now, and I'll stop the recording, and then those that want to hang around a bit may do so. Is that okay with everybody if I stop the recording now?
Yes.
Oh, goody.